everybody. Standing over here on everyone's right, leftish.
Okay, and I'm not Elizabeth yet. Okay, I'm Leith. Yeah.
Oh, this is Miss Leith Mullally.
Mullally.
She's going to introduce herself.
Okay. I feel like some of you are really far away. Do you want to come closer, or are you okay where you are? Okay. I won't bite, I promise. How many of you are med students? Okay, and what's your specialty going to be? OBGYN. Family practice, anybody? Peds, anybody? Okay, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit, but I'm an OB nurse and worked in women's health for a very long time, and I have to tell you, I was totally ignorant about human sex trafficking. And I even taught at UVA in the School of Nursing, and I still was totally ignorant about human sex trafficking. So the fact that you're here really says a lot about how fantastic the future is going to look with some knowledgeable physicians out there. What are some of the rest of you? Social workers? Caseworkers? Okay, counselors? Okay, great. So I have entitled this Human Sex Trafficking is Where You Live. And the reason for that is, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, most people think it's elsewhere. You know, it's not in my backyard. And in fact, it is in our backyard. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that we are so very ignorant. So, this is going to work. It worked a minute ago. Hannah, it worked a minute ago. It's not happy. Huh. I did test it, guy. There. Up. Keyboard does the same thing. Okay. Oh, that's even better, right?
And then you can just click the
Okay, cool. Okay. You know, we have to have objectives, right? So at the end of this presentation, we'll be able to list 4 facts about domestic sex trafficking, 10 potential red flags. And that's really important for people in healthcare, because a lot of young women will say, I was in healthcare hands multiple times and nobody saw me. And then describe the Nordic model, which is a whole different way of looking at prostitution that is happening in other countries. So prostitution is not a victimless crime. And I think a lot of people think it is. They think prostitutes just make a fortune and it's a life choice. And in fact, that's wrong, 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 wrong. I agree with Amnesty International, UNAIDS, and other groups that say those who sell sex acts should not be arrested or prosecuted. But I cannot support proposals to decriminalize buyers and pimps. If paying for sex is normalized, then every young boy will learn that women and girls are commodities to be bought and sold. And that's from Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter, as a past president, has been a huge force internationally trying to fight human sex trafficking. Here's the truth, and this is an awfully long slide, and I apologize for that. I think it's the only long one I have, but both adults and children are victimized in commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking through physically, psychologically, and emotionally violent methods. And this is important. Not all victims of human trafficking are abducted into exploitation. Many victims are often gradually seasoned into violent situations through progressively severe forms of abuse. Many victims of trafficking experience the Stockholm Syndrome, or trauma bonding, which prevents them from easily leaving or even fully recognizing that they are victims. Abusers include both the trafficker and the buyer. So we have to stop blaming the victim. All right, I'm going to give you a short true and false quiz. You can just yell out the answers. Human sex trafficking occurs in every country, including the USA, but is found primarily in Southeast Asia, South America, and Europe. True or false? False, that's right. Younger girls bring the most money. True or false? It's actually true, and you'll find pimps will try and keep girls looking younger and younger because, unfortunately, men pay more money for younger girls. It's very sick, very sick. The majority of sex trafficking solicitation occurs online. True or false? That is true. And that's changed in the last decade. You don't see young women standing on the street corner like you might have a decade ago. A lot of solicitation now occurs online. Prostitutes choose this lifestyle and benefit financially from it. False, yes. Every hotel and motel in the USA has prostitution services available. Now, we're talking about the 5-star Ritz-Carlton and the little rural motel out in, Podunk. Do you think that's true or false? It's actually true. The police and the FBI will tell you there's not a single facility that cannot obtain a prostitute for a man who's looking. Boys are trafficked as young as 7 years old. That's actually true. Boys are trafficked younger than girls. Now, in the state of Virginia, we see many more women and girls than we do boys, but nationally, it's about 50-50. Pimps can be wealthy, respected businessmen and women. True, very true. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but they're not the people that you see in the movies. Customers of prostitution include physicians, pastors, lawyers, college boys, military, city council, and congressional representatives. That's true. That's absolutely true. A pimp can identify a vulnerable child in less than 2 minutes. That's true, and that was actually a study that was done in prison. And they took a pimp and they had him watch the back of middle school children, and he was able to go like this. Isn't that kind of frightening? More than 90% of prostitutes are victims of child sexual abuse. That is true. So can you see how victimization has occurred very early? Prostitutes frequently have a tattooed number or brand to identify ownership by their pimp. True. We actually had a young woman at LATISHA'S house that had the pimp's name tattooed in great big font all the way across her chest. And a man and his wife in Williamsburg, who are tattoo artists, removed these pro bono, but it took hours per letter, over a period of time. Virginia was the last state in the country to adopt specific laws against human sex trafficking. True or false? Actually true. Isn't that a wonderful distinction to have? So I want to tell you this story. Envision an 11-year-old girl in the 5th grade playing with her beloved Barbie dolls. This is her story. I'm a normal child living in a horrible household. My dad is an Air Force colonel who is so loving one minute and so threatening the next. He beats my mom behind their bedroom door. I can hear my mother scream, see her bruises, and hear my daddy crying and saying how sorry he is. I never know which father to expect. My Barbie doll world helps me to escape the real world at home. One day, I come home from school to find my mom is gone. Gone. Where, I do not know. When my daddy comes home from work, he goes into the worst rage I have ever seen. He starts throwing lamps, smashing dishes, and for the very first time, he comes after me with rage and big fists, and I run out the door in terror. I never come back. I run to my friend's house, but her mommy says, "Oh, honey, don't be silly and so dramatic. Your father is a wonderful man, and your mom probably just forgot to mention where she was going. Now, child, you need to go right on home. It's getting dark." My Barbie life is over. I am much too afraid to go home. Besides, I have to figure out a way to find my mother. It's getting later and darker. I've never been out after dark alone before. I sit down on a bench, and I just cried and cried and cried. No idea what to do. That is when Miss Jean found me. She was an older lady. She put her arm around me and said, "Sugar, what is wrong?" When I told her my long, sad story, she took me home to a big, pretty house and gave me 3 Barbie dolls. A week later, when I was just barely 12 years old, Miss Jean introduced me to her son, and I became the 6th young girl in his stable. I was quite pretty, so men paid $500 a night or more for me. I was continually raped. I had no way of knowing it, but the younger the girl, the more profitable she is to her pimp. I'm trafficked up and down the I-95 corridor. Sometimes I live in a place for 2 weeks, sometimes a month or so, sometimes just long enough to make my quota for the pimp that owned me at the moment. I was a piece of meat sold from pimp to pimp. Thinking about how many states handle prostitutes, most of the time you're put in jail for about 16 hours and released. Many times you're arrested with your pimp. That actually leaves most girls like me too scared to talk to the officials. I clearly remember a time when my pimp told me to keep my mouth shut or I'd disappear. He was released because no one is ever willing to testify against a pimp. I remained in jail for 5 months. That turned out to be the best 5 months of my life. Finally, I was away from the control of being owned. The police really helped me. I gradually found the courage to testify, along with 2 other girls, against several of my pimps. In court, they said my current pimp was making more than $2 million a year. Oh, by the way, Miss Jean and her son are now in federal prison. The FBI was involved because I'd been taken across state lines. They introduced me to LATISHA'S house. I was very unsure, very hesitant and fearful, but decided, what have I got to lose? I arrived at LATISHA'S house a frightened, ashamed, angry, hostile, and defensive 19-year-old. Gradually, I learned that I could, in fact, trust some adults. They had to earn my trust, and I had to earn theirs. I received hours and hours of counseling to work through the severe trauma of my past. They tutored me to get my GED. My last year in school was 5th grade. They had me treated for 3 different STDs. They fed me as I was considerably underweight. At LATISHA'S house, I was treated like I was living in a strong, stable family home, something I had never known. As a child, I had always liked to cook with my mommy. I even had a kitchen in our playroom. I had tons of tea parties with my Barbie. My mother told me that I would be a great chef. Well, the folks at LATISHA'S house helped raise money to send me to a top-rated culinary school. It's Mary's story. These are all clip art, but I want you to just know, one of the reasons it's hard sometimes for us to identify what we're looking at is that there's victims all look different. They really look like people in your neighborhood. So they're slim, they're obese, they're tall, they're short, they're beautiful, they're plain, they're black, they're white. In other words, they really are the girl next door. You could walk down the mall and everybody you see could possibly be the victim of sex trafficking. The decision to screen should not be based on a single characteristic. You're not going to find one thing that's going to say, oh, I have to screen her for sex trafficking. But here are some things to just be aware of. If you're looking at a runaway youth, especially if it's recurrent, why are they running away? Youth with a history of abuse or violence. The LGBTQ community is very high risk. Youth in foster homes. A lot of girls are actually sold to pimps from foster homes. Very scary thought. Pregnant teenagers, or teenagers who are fearful of pregnancy, or teenagers who've had multiple abortions. Youth with a lot of money and fancy sexual clothes. Teens that are familiar with human sex trafficking terms like stable, or living in the life, or the game. And they almost never have a stable address and no community connections. So they are higher risk for you to screen, but by no means is that covering the whole gamut. The definition under Virginia law is that human trafficking is when people profit from the control and exploitation of others. There are 2 types of human trafficking: sex trafficking, and labor trafficking. It occurs within and across the U.S. borders, victimizing both U.S. citizens and non-citizens, both children and adults, both men and women. A few facts on domestic sex trafficking. And this is mostly from the FBI. I think an awful lot of Americans, it was really funny in Williamsburg. We don't have prostitution in Williamsburg. Not us. I mean, no. We're a beautiful little historic town with tourists. This couldn't happen to us. But what we've done is, in this country, is we think that prostitutes are all being brought in from Thailand or from the former Soviet Union. And yes, American men are bad people, but the girls aren't us. Well, that absolutely is not true. What the FBI says is that 300,000 native-born and bred Americans are trafficked every year. That's a humongous number to me. Girls are first trafficked as young as 11 to 13, boys as young as 7 to 8. 7 to 8-year-olds. That's second and third grade. Sex trafficking is the second fastest growing crime in the United States. About $1.5 million if you have a stable of 6 girls or boys. And it's about 150 billion worldwide. What do you think what's the fastest growing crime in this country? Anybody have an idea? It's identity theft. That's number 1, and this is number 2. This is an important thing too, especially for people in healthcare. Under U.S. law, trafficked children under the age of 18 are victims, but locally they're often treated as criminals. But that's actually against the law. So if you're under the age, if you're a minor, you're always considered a victim. Domestic violence calls from hotels, and Liz and I have done some classes for the Williamsburg Police, and one of the things that the FBI will tell you is if you get a domestic violence call from a hotel, it's almost always sex trafficking. And that was very kind of eye-opening for the police. There are only approximately 300 residential beds nationwide for sex trafficking victims, and we're looking at 300,000 people, 300 beds. A critical role of technology. We talked about the fact that most solicitations today are online, and in fact, they make a lot more money, much more profitable online. These are some of the places that people can go: Tinder, Eros, Plenty of Fish. It's available in chat rooms. If you see ads, you know how sometimes you're doing something totally innocent and this thing pops up and it's an ad? If you see an ad that says massage in your hotel room with scantily dressed women, especially if the face has been blurred, that means she's a minor. That's almost always solicitation. Microsoft, Facebook, they're all working to change access and protect children, but they're a long ways from getting there. I mean, I do think they really believe that they want to help, but they're not anywhere near actually meeting the goal. So here are some red flags when you all are seeing patients. Mismatch. And you've probably seen this. Sometimes you see this in OB, where you have this older guy and this very young girl, and he does all the talking. You're interviewing, and he's doing all the talking. That makes you, one red flag off, say it may be a domestic abuse situation where he's totally in control. But if you see somebody who's very well-dressed, rather overbearing, with an underdressed, looking malnourished girl who could be thin or obese, the trafficker answers all the questions and talks for the patient. You have to separate them. Now, I worked with a group of nurses. I thought they were really clever. If they suspected the guy was overbearing and abusive in some way, they started giving him salty things. Potato chips, Fritos, Doritos. And then when he had to pee, they said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You can't use the patient bathroom. That's our rule. You'll have to go down the hall to the men's room." I had a colleague who worked in the ED, physician, and he used to, when he suspected, or one of the nurses came and said they suspected a situation, he would say, "Well, we love having families here, but we need to go to X-ray. So if you'll just you can just sit right here in her cubicle, and we'll be right back." And he says, as soon as I got the stretcher down the back hall, I could do an interview. So there have to be ways to get a little creative about separating people if you suspect. Physical signs, beating and rape. Do you all know to look for the bathing suit? So a lot of abusers will damage the parts of the body that would normally be covered by a bathing suit. That's what it's called, bathing suit trauma. So not the arms, not the legs, not the face, because that's so obvious to people. So instead they punch the stomach, they harm the breasts, they do things that aren't obvious out front. A lot of women look emaciated because the pimp is trying to make them look younger. So tries to actually stop the development of this person. Chronic STDs, almost 100% of women being trafficked have STDs, and many of them have other health issues. Self-injuries. I want you to picture that you are being raped 12 to 15 times a day. A lot of people want out of that situation. So they will try and commit suicide, or they will cut. They will actually do things sometimes just to get into healthcare hands, praying that healthcare will intervene. Unfortunately, most of the time we miss it. And a numbered tattoo. But rarely do these women have their own ID. So it's Uncle John is with them, or Auntie Mary is with them, and they have ID, but the girl herself does not. Another red flag. And just some more to look at. Look at your patient's affect. Do they seem anxious around you? Fearful? Will they not look at you? Do they look totally depressed? Are they hostile and aggressive? Angry? Very flat? Inability to concentrate? Look at their eyes. A lot of times you see pain in eyes. We have found that they all have post-traumatic stress. You can imagine if this is being done to you multiple times a day. And here's, I guess, my bottom line. If your gut says to you, something's not right here, trust your gut. Trust your gut. Those instincts tend to be so true. How does all this happen? Recruiters look for access where children are. And I guess one of the places that really surprised me was juvenile court, domestic violence court, family court. Children they see who are vulnerable. They're in the mall. I think families are much less likely to let their teenage girls wander the mall for hours. It's not safe. So they're on the lookout. And what is a pimp? I think we had this image from the movies. The guy, he's got the hat, and he's got the jewelry, and he's really suave and swanky. And that just ain't it. Remember how much money we're talking about. If you're clearing $1.5 to $2 million a year tax-free, that appeals to people who are not just out on the street. So most pimps today are sophisticated. They're business savvy. They see this as a very lucrative form of commerce. They do work across state lines and across borders. And that's why Homeland Security, the FBI, state police, local police, everybody's involved. And I will tell you, although Virginia was the last state in the union to pass a law, I would say our Commonwealth attorneys have made up for lost time. They are so engaged in trying to help the situation. I really give them a tremendous amount of kudos. They hide large amounts of money in apartment buildings, offshore accounts, organized crime, and fake businesses. We're talking a lot of money. The word pimp, just for fun, comes from the French pimper, which means to dress elegantly or to be alluring and seductive in your dress. There are many types of pimps, but these two are kind of prominent. One is the finesse pimp, bait and switch, like the Miss Jean. They rescue you. You're out on the street and you're 12 years old, they rescue you. They give you a nice warm bed, they give you good meals, they're very loving and nurturing, and they gain your trust. Think about being 11, 12, 13 on the street. And then they say, you owe me, you owe me. And the only way for you to pay back what I've given you so gracefully is to do this. Then there's also the gorilla pimp, and they're very threatening and intimidating. They use physical violence, sexual violence. They threaten your family, and they're often gang related. So one's kind of this nurturing, loving, I'm so blessed that I got into good hands, and one is clearly violent and intimidating. There are other types as well. This is clip art again, but I wanted to give you an idea of the pimp. So we have businessmen, we have businesswomen, we have Grammy up here. We certainly have the guy up here on the screen that looks like the television and movie version. But it could be any of these people. And these are the customers. These are the customers of forced, unwanted sex. The pastor, the military, the high school boy, the businessman, the old geezers. I mean, unfortunately, it's everybody. It's a very, very sick dynamic. My husband will say to me, I can't figure out what's the matter with my gender. What's the matter with my gender? That men feel that this is something they have a right to do. This is a U.S. State Department 2000 Protection Act. Many are trafficked by fraud, coercion, manipulation, or force. And this is an important number 2 here. Sexual exploitation of a minor is considered trafficking regardless of the presence or absence of force, fraud, or coercion. Think about that, makes sense. If you have little boys 7 and 8, you have little girls, 11, 12, 13, even if there's no force or fraud, they're still victims. It doesn't matter. One prostitute may be forced to service as many as 15 different men a day. Have you ever wondered why they don't leave? Why don't they run away from these people? There's some really good reasons. One is that they overwhelmingly start as minors. Most are trying to escape their childhood sexual abuse, so they've run away from home. They have no home to go back to. Their parents are either fighting, divorced, drug addicts. It's no place to go back to. Or they've had a boyfriend that basically sold them into slavery. The pimp does become the new family. They do give them a roof over their head. They do give them food, even if they may limit the amount. And they really like to be called uncle or daddy or auntie. And they give you drugs if you make your quota. So one of the things they do to keep you is to get you drug addicted. I have a very good friend who says, I would want to be drug addicted. I would want to have my mind just blotted out if I'm being raped that many times a day. But that's one way that they keep you in line. You meet your quota for the day, and I give you drugs. Victims are told if you leave, or you or your family will be killed, and almost every girl knows somebody who has disappeared. Many, many pumps get girls addictable. I just said that. A strong advocate for addressing human sex trafficking is our former president, Jimmy Carter. The abuse of women and girls is the most pervasive and unaddressed human rights violation on earth. Have you ever heard a child say, when I grow up, I want to be a prostitute? Hardly. They wanted to be a nurse. They wanted to be a mother. They wanted to be a firefighter. They wanted to be a physician. They wanted to be a teacher. They wanted to be a lawyer. No one ever grows up thinking, oh, what I want to do when I grow up is be a prostitute. And yet there are people out there who think this is a choice, and these women are making great money, and they love the life. I just want to mention the Nordic model, and this is a different way of looking at prostitution. It was pioneered in Sweden, and they've seen a dramatic decrease in prostitution. It's been adopted now in Canada, France, Norway, Northern Ireland, and recently in Israel. And what this says is it decriminalizes the prostituted woman. It recognizes her as a true victim. It offers housing, trauma counseling, job training, and more. And if you purchase sex or you profit from sex, it's looked at as a very serious crime. And these people are actually going to prison, like big time. And they're posting their pictures in the post office. So, and critics assert that adults should be able to exchange money for sex if they want to. But what the Nordic model looked at was there's a power imbalance. So they pay you, and then you are totally at their mercy. You have no choice in what you're doing here. Interestingly, New Zealand and Germany have legalized all facets of sex, and they're seeing an increase in trafficking. Surprise, surprise. Things that you can begin to do now. Learn as much as you can about human sex trafficking in your own community. And I know last year when we did this, some of the med students came up to me and they said, you know, we're starting our residency in our internship in July. And what should we do when we get there? We really believe in this. And I'll tell you what I told them. I said, keep your mouth shut for 6 months. Be an observer. See who the informal power is. Who are the influencers in your environment? And after 6 months, when you've developed some trust with them and they've developed some trust with you, then you can begin to talk about how important this is that we all recognize it. Look for those red flags: scanty clothes, numbered tattoos, frequent STDs, a very unclear past history, no stable address, usually no ID. Fearful or defiant with an older man or woman in control. And one other thing, is the patient's age wrong? I've talked to young women who said, I was being presented in the emergency department as a 19-year-old. My body was the body of a 13-year-old. And the nurses and doctors never looked at me and went, this is not computing. No way is this kid 18. So think about those kinds of things you just have to be alert to. If you believe that you may be having a sex traffic victim in your midst, call the police. Call the police. The police are so savvy. You know, it's kind of like this was a topic never discussed, and now it's everywhere discussed. So you're much better off making a mistake than letting somebody through your... Another thing, be sure that we're educating the people in our community. Fairfax County, for about the last 7 or 8 years, and we're beginning to see it elsewhere in Virginia, has had what are called skip parties. And these really good-looking guys tell kind of a not as popular girl in middle school, hey, we're having a big party. We're going to skip 3rd and 4th period, but we'll have you back before school's over. Nobody will ever know. You're just going to skip. Well, they skip to the party. They're date raped. They're videoed, and then they're told it'll go viral unless they do exactly what they're told. Parents need to know this is going on. Fairfax County has gone into every school, talked to as many parents as they can. Who would even think of this stuff? But it's out there. And begin to work with local and state law enforcement. They want to learn more. They really do want to learn more. They're very open. Healthcare providers, I think, can make a huge difference. Follow your gut. Document in detail. Take pictures. Look at that bathing suit area. Are the breasts damaged? Are there big bruises in the gut? Are there anal fissures? Are there signs, clear signs of rape? Take pictures. Write in detail. Write in detail who accompanied this patient to the ED or to OB or wherever. And remember that you may never get a second opportunity. I can't tell you how many young women have said to us, I was in healthcare hands, and they let me slip through the cracks. There are resources, and you all have them out there. You don't have to write these down, but they're out on your desk. There are lots of resources that you can call for help. And I'll tell you, I think young people are much more savvy than old people. I was talking with this woman, and she said, you know, it was really cold last winter one day, and my daughter, who was a freshman in college, and I pulled up to this parking lot to go into the store, and there was a young girl standing there, no shoes and no coat on. And I said to my daughter, oh my gosh, look at that child. My daughter said to me, call 911, I'm going to get her, I don't care where the pimp is. Shook her into the store and held her in the store until the police got there. I mean, and my friend's going, My daughter was so much faster and quicker and brighter than I was. Sex trafficking where you live, does anyone see me? And the answer is yes. Welcome to LATISHA'S house. Liz. And if you guys have got questions, we'll answer them at the end, okay?
Okay, so now how did you make this work?
They're going to switch it for you.
Okay.
So this is Miss Elizabeth Ameling. She is the founder and executive director of LATISHA'S House. With over 15 years of experience, Elizabeth works with women who are at risk and who have been victims of sexual exploitation. Mrs. Ameling also participates in stings with law enforcement, with law enforcement, and she works closely with victims to advocate for them, including with the Attorney General's Office, Homeland Security, the FBI, local police, and anti-trafficking organizations. She is a certified traumatologist by the Center for Trauma Studies at Regent University and American Green Cross. She brings a trauma-informed approach to victims of sex trafficking and to members of the community in her trainings and public awareness talks like today.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so, let's see, are we gonna? Of course, I'm old and I can't see to put this on my jacket because I'm blind up close. I'll just hold it. And the clicker, let me see. Is this gonna work? Yeah, that's right. I think so, yeah, okay, because we've got a lot of PowerPoints. So what I was going to do was just go through a little bit of the psychology of what we deal with at the house, and I will go through it quickly because we have a survivor here today, Ashley O'Leary, who is my senior house manager, and she's been with us for 6 years. And I want you to hear from her directly because she's experienced the negative things that happened when she wasn't identified, and she's experienced healing, and she's really quite amazing. And so her words are more important than mine. But this just goes through the psychology of what you see. And if you're a counselor, if you're a medical student, you've taken psych classes, you're going to run into these things, and they're also signs for you to look at. There we go. So trafficking victims are welcomed home. We're not a typical short stay of 60 to 90 days, but a minimum stay of 10 months to 4 years. Our average stay is 18 months. We provide holistic wraparound services, counseling, shelter, safety, medical care, medication, and support services, and we work with the courts. LATISHA'S House is, to my knowledge, the only safe house in the country that provides this wraparound care, and we extend it through vocational school or college. We're 7 years old in March, and as we've grown, our mission has grown. And I'm going to get a little bit off script later and tell you about our next mission and hope you all get excited about it. If you want a headliner, we want to open transitional safe houses in places called Hope Village. So after you graduate from a safe house, you have an additional 2 years where you still go to counseling, get drug testing, volunteer, work on your college, have financial literacy, save to become a homeowner, and your children can live with you. So that's our next step. So fewer than 2% of all victims of trafficking are rescued. If you go back to that statistic, 300,000 women and children a year, it's closer to 1% are rescued. And rescue usually comes in the form of being arrested. Most women who are arrested spend months to years in jail for crimes they committed while victims of handlers, traffickers, and pimps. Okay. Oh, Virginia's ranked 6th in the nation. I don't know if you all knew that or not. Unfortunately, we used to be 9, now we're 6. In Virginia, Northern Virginia is number 1. Hampton Roads is number 2, which is where Williamsburg is, and Richmond is number 3. And the Richmond police have worked a long time to work. We work closely with Mike Feimel, the Attorney General here. Northern Virginia, proximity to D.C., it's just a hub. But in Williamsburg, Little Williamsburg, Sleepy Williamsburg, and Hampton Roads, we're now number 2. Because until recently, traffickers came there and they could do whatever they wanted with impunity. Because we didn't have law enforcement, we don't have a SWAT team. Just last fall, we had a trafficker that kidnapped 2 girls from Virginia Beach and brought them to Williamsburg. Because we'd done training with law enforcement, they called Ashley and I at the office, and we went where these 2 girls had been strangled by a pimp. He'd bitten one girl on the shoulder. They were crying. They had drug issues. We only had 1 bed and not 2 because our house is almost always full. But the pimp had gotten away, and this is Williamsburg. So 2 weeks later, he was tattooed. He had tiger marks all over his face, and he was dangerous. His family lived in our community, so the girl that we took to her house was afraid to stay because he said he would kill her. And so a couple weeks later, the Hampton Road SWAT team came, dressed in all their glory, marching across the yard with James City County, York County Police. It was the most excitement Williamsburg had ever had, and they took down this trafficker. But he also was charged with 8 felonies, 2 counts of kidnapping, attempted murder, etc. And so when I talk to people in Williamsburg, they say it doesn't happen here, but the sting or the operation took place literally steps away from Colonial Williamsburg in the city of Williamsburg. So it is everywhere. And the irony is there were children with their parents checking into the hotel to go look at the horses. And there we were with law enforcement in a ransacked room with 2 girls that had strangulation marks on their necks. Let's see. Don't you love technology? Try the computer. Let me see. I am blind without my glasses. There we go. Oh, that's great. So we're the only long-term residents in Virginia that allows women to stay where they go to court, go to counseling. So we're the only open-ended program I know. Most programs are 12 months at the max, and our average stay is 18 to 24 months. Healing takes time. According to the Center for Trauma Studies, most trafficking victims have PTSD and DID, dissociative identity disorder. That comes with trauma because if you're not using drugs to self-medicate, you disassociate when you're being raped. And everybody in this room, if you've ever had a trauma, you've disassociated. What makes this different is you disassociate all the time, and it becomes a way of life. It becomes a coping mechanism, and that's why healing takes so long. Most programs in the U.S. are Band-Aids. They're well-intentioned. And the national average of recidivism is between 79 and 86%, which is horrific. And we have a recidivism rate of 18%. And there's a direct correlation between our success and the length of time that people stay at our house. Because you have to learn, if you have dissociative identity disorder, which is really, really common, you basically zone out. You take yourself somewhere else. Your body may be going through something, but your mind is somewhere else. At our house, what we do is we help women learn to bring all those different pieces together. Those different alters or parts, they come together. So they can say, that's the 6-year-old that's reacting, but I'm 30 years old and I'm safe. And I don't have to do that anymore. And that takes months and years. So the misconception, most women are overseas. We've had 1 girl from China in 7 years. LATISHA'S house, the other were born and raised in the U.S. and trafficked by family members, boyfriends, of course, by other adults, including moms. Women choose a lifestyle, can leave, of course they cannot. Pimps make an average of $1.5 million in 6 months. Traffickers, these are all things that you've seen. They come from all walks of life. One of our first resident, her pimp was the head of the PTA. And she was arrested at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in D.C. And she'd been trafficked when she was 14. So we use comprehensive counseling methods, utilize proven therapies. When they first come, we do ISPs, individualized service plans. The house staff work together. We have a team approach. We have multiple certified counselors, but we work as a team. So whatever happens at LATISHA'S house stays at LATISHA'S house, but we work collaboratively. So there's no triangulation and playing one person against another. We have LPCs, LCSWs, and psychiatric care to help out. And we use psychotropic medications. And when you come to our house, you sign a contract. You voluntarily come, but you agree to do program. And if the psychiatrist says you need to take medication, you take your medication. So you take your medication as prescribed, you go to counseling as recommended, and you participate in our programs. Because honestly, if you're suffering from trauma, you may not always feel like going to a counselor, but it's probably the best thing we can help you do. We take advantage of EMDR. I'm certified EMDR. I love it for working with trauma. We use Gestalt medication, help women find stability as they deal with multiple traumas. Our house staff are trained and certified in the HEART model. We do it every year. I'm a trainer. It's the Heart's Emotional Effective Response to Trauma, and we'll give you a taste of what that looks like. And it was designed to help specifically victims of sex trafficking. So part 1. So this, I'll go through this really fast. Normally the HEART model class is a 2-day seminar of 16 hours, and you get 15 continuing education credits for it. But we're going to do this in 20 minutes or less. And so, but you already probably all know all this anyway. So The HEART model was the first design model consistent with current treatment of PTSD, dissociation, and borderline disorders that addresses both secular design and need for spiritual inclusion. Because women that are traumatized always say, "Where was God?" It's just part of it. And studies have shown, multiple studies, when women have some kind of awareness of a spirit, regardless of what that is, they do better in healing. So the HEART's emotional affective response to trauma, that's what that stands for. So initial phase, we do rapport building when we work with residents at the house, trust issues, safety issues, confidentiality, crisis stabilization. When a girl first comes to our house, I call them girls, I shouldn't, they're 18 and above. When a young woman comes to our house, she may be going through detox, she may need to just settle. She's been running in survival mode, and when she's at our house, the first 24 to 48 hours, we don't do anything. We let her sleep, we let her feel safe. She sleeps in a bed where nobody hurts her. So orientation to the therapeutic process, that's really important. Boundary issues, system mapping. We do all of that the first couple of weeks. Uncovering memory phase 2, we have to deal with memory because trauma, if you have dissociative identity disorder, if you suffer from PTSD, if you have any of those things on that spectrum, what you do with trauma is you bury it so you don't have to deal with it and you don't have to hurt. But if you want to heal and live a successful life, you have to deal with it. You have to face those demons. So uncovering memory is important. We process affect, cognitive restructuring. Of course, you all know that's how you think. Fusion, integration, most therapy work around memories, affect regulation, cognitive distortions, it's my fault, I'm stupid, I caused it to happen, etc., and life stabilization. Phase 3, find integrations, and we're talking about integrating all the different parts because trauma makes people split. It's like dropping a mirror on the floor and it breaks into 2,000 little pieces. Imagine trying to put all that back together. Well, a woman who's been trafficked and raped thousands of times and beaten and burned with cigarettes, hurt by family members. She's like a broken mirror that's splintered into little pieces on the floor. And what we do with this HEART model is we help women put the pieces back together. And it's a really good thought because when you put the mirror back together, they look at it and they see somebody else. They see somebody new. And that's what happens when it's successful. It's pretty cool. So final integration, you resolve sexual issues, spiritual issues, and you have closure. So the first thing we do, create a safe environment. We connect to memory, process affect, do all of those things. So forgiveness of God. Now, when we talk about God, we don't beat people over the head with you have to believe in God. That's not healthy, and that's not what we do. But women inevitably say, when I was being raped, where was God? Or why did God allow this to happen? And so they have issues they have to resolve because they're angry at God. It makes sense. So we have to talk about that. History and development of counseling prior to the HEART model. There was a lot of really crappy stuff out there. I could say crappy stuff. There was horrendous stuff out there that was being used. Christian counseling, well-intentioned, misguided, blames the victim. Trauma model today, again, is not like that. We use the 3 phases as a systemic approach, specialized techniques. We have a structural model of disassociation and trauma. We use EMDR, which is great, and we use other things like that. EMDR is wonderful. So I'm sure you all have seen this. It's not a very bright slide, but borderline personality, this is a spectrum of disorders related to trauma. And so we mostly see a lot of borderline personality, we see a lot of PTSD, and we see a lot of dissociation. And it can be specified or non-specified. And so if you don't know, and I'm assuming most of you do know, when you're well-adjusted, you have all the different parts. Our personalities, the movie Inside Out was great. It just described this really well. We all have different parts of our personality and things that make us us. I can think back to when I was 4. I can think back to when I was 2. I know what I was like in college and grad school. I can connect all the different parts of me as a daughter, as a wife, as a mom, as a counselor. However, if you have neuroses, you have some splits in your different parts. If you have a borderline personality, and I drew the slides, they're a little bit kindergarten-y looking, but if you have a borderline personality, those things are not so defined. When you have dissociative disorders non-specified, you might not know what the 4-year-old part of you is thinking or reacting to in stress. You might have a trigger. I knew somebody who was raped by her dad in a field of figs. And she thought she'd dealt with the trauma. She'd been raped and abused, and her brother died on the street, and her mom dropped dead, and she grew up in juvenile detention. And she became a counselor. I mean, she got a master's degree. She worked as a probation officer, and then one day I had her at my house, and I got out Fig Newtons. I had no idea. She literally became almost catatonic, couldn't talk. It's the smell of the Fig Newtons. I said, and she was literally just unable to communicate, almost like in a little ball. I found out later that her father raped her where there were figs, and the smell of Fig Newtons took her back. She had to go to counseling, and she had to deal with the 4-year-old that had been raped because the smell of Fig Newtons triggered her. So she immediately did what she did when she was 4. She smelled the Fig Newtons sitting in my kitchen, and she disassociated, and she went somewhere else. And it happens. We had a girl, a staff person at our house who'd been raped by her brother years ago, and she thought she had healed. And we were doing therapeutic yoga, and the staff do yoga with the residents. It's fun. We also do aerobics. It's great fun. If you volunteer and you come on Friday, you get to do aerobics and burn up a sweat and do whatever. Anyway, somebody touched her leg to correct her yoga position, and she immediately disassociated and was reliving what had happened to her when she was a child. And so we took her off the schedule. She had to go back and do EMDR and deal with it. So dissociative identity disorder, that's when you have no idea. So we talk about it at our house. We identify in our notes. T1 is there's trauma in the middle. T-1 is before the trauma happened. When we do our psychosocial assessment, the last question we ask is, what did you want to be when you grow up? What were you before this happened? What were you before you were sexually abused and trafficked and whatever? And they always have dreams, and we write down the adjectives. I mean, they say, describe you before this happened. They say funny, joyful, energetic, mischievous. I loved to dance. I loved to sing. I loved my dolls. I loved my dog. And then we say, how were you when the trauma happened? And it's always depressed, horrible, hopeless, sad. And then what we want to do is build a bridge to a positive future. You'll see that a lot. What's T+1, trauma +1? It's dealing with the trauma and build a bridge over it. So you connect the past positive things and make those become present realities. So that's how we kind of track women as they're at the house. So how long till my soul gets it right? Now, I love this. If you ask me what trauma therapy looks like, this is what it is. Catastrophic events, significant emotional impact results in difficulty with daily life. It's a simple definition. Dealing with emotions may disrupt relationships and cause severe family problems. Risk factors, Letha already went through that. Mother-child interactions, children going to authorities, traumatic events occur before the age of 11 result in a much greater stress reaction in adolescence. And when 4 more risk factors, it increases tenfold, and you're much more likely to have a girl who's sex trafficked. Resiliency factors, if I could, boy, wouldn't we love to give resiliency to everyone? If somebody tells me how to do that, I will gladly take that on. Because not everybody's born with resiliency. People come from the same traumatic situations, and some women are resilient and some women are not, and it's really hard. But high verbal ability, being able to communicate, having one caring parent figure in immediate surroundings. Studies have shown if there's one caring person in a child's environment, no matter what other circumstances there are, the child is much less likely to be sex trafficked or victimized. So it just takes one person. So that's the amazing thing. Everybody in this room can be that one person for one kid. If you see a needy child, you get involved with them. Lee's husband tutors a little boy that's homeless, and he sees him every week. He's not just helping him with academics, he's believing in him. He's saying he's wonderful. That's going to impact that child for generations, and he's much less likely to end up in the criminal justice system or something like that. If you have a capacity for goal-oriented behavior, women that can vision and dream dreams and can think ahead even in the middle of dire circumstances. An open, supportive educational climate, early identification and intervention. If you said, Miss Liz, the girls call me Miss Liz, what's the biggest way to stop sex trafficking? I would say identify victims of childhood sexual abuse or psychological abuse and remedy the situation and get them treatment. Because if they are treated and deal with the trauma, the predator and the pimp who can pick them out in 2 minutes is not going to be able to do it. That's the way we stop it, really. So trauma is not of human design and not family. So trauma, we talk about narrative memory, implicit memory, Horn Fair. So implicit memory, Horn Fair, the body remembers. People can't always verbalize a trauma that happens, but their bodies remember. There's a book called The Body Remembers, if you've seen that. Narrative memory is when your brain has processed it and you can put it into words. When you have trauma, there's a gap. If somebody's in a car accident, everything slows down. Has anybody ever been in a car accident in this room? Okay, when it happened, I was in one too. The world slowed down. I saw it in slow motion like I was outside the car. Of course, I wasn't outside the car, and we were not in slow motion. We were going very rapidly into a tree. But I disassociated because that's what your brain does in trauma. When law enforcement got there, they said, what happened? There were 3 people in the car. Guess what? We all said something different. We were 3 people in the same car that hit the same tree, but our experiences were different because trauma impacts your ability to narrate what happened. The horror and the fear was all the same, but the way we saw it was different. So repeated trauma erodes the structure of the personality already formed. We talked about that. Repeated trauma in childhood forms and deforms the personality. The child trapped in an abusive environment is faced with adaptation. They do different things to survive situations that are unsafe, control in a situation that's unpredictable, parent in a situation of helplessness. So they manage with the best psychological defenses they have, and that's usually disassociation. So symptoms of PTSD, re-experiencing the event, intense psychological distress and exposure to reminders like the smell of figs, persistent avoidance, persistent arousal, or overstimulation. Borderline personality, we deal with a lot of that. Identity issues, unstable self-image, impulsivity, 0 to 60, spending, sex, drugs, alcohol, shoplifting, binge eating, reckless driving, suicidal behaviors, gestures, self-mutilating behavior. Affect instability, and we see a lot of that. Dysphoria, mix of depression, anxiety, rage, and despair. Most women who are trafficked go from 0 to 60. If you are a clinician and you have a girl in your ED room or OB room, and you ask her a question and she goes 0 to 60 and reacts, that's one of those telltale signs. Because you might ask a totally innocent question. We had a resident at our house who went to the free clinic because most women have Hep C, whatever, STDs. And the doctor happened to be a man. He couldn't help it, and she was a woman. And he came in the room, and he touched her, and she hauled off and came 2 centimeters away from literally laying him flat on the floor. It was not something she could control. All he did was want to do an exam to see how she was. And his motion made her immediately become aggressive. If you see that, if you see women get enraged 0 to 60 when you're asking them about their medical histories, it's a sign. We see it a lot. Feelings of emptiness, intense anger, lack of controlling anger. We have classes on anger management. It's one of our biggest issues. Jealousy, dissociative symptoms, addiction, and triangulation. Women who've been trafficked also always want somebody to be the rescuer. They are the victim almost always, and somebody's the perpetrator. So if you meet somebody and they're putting you in those roles, that's a sign. So we see trance, we see personality splitting, compartmentalization, amnesia. People don't remember, even when law enforcement will say, we came to the room and this is what happened, and they have no recollection of it, sometimes for months. Analgesics, anesthesia, numbness, sleepwalking, regression, dissociative identity disorder. Early memory, so most of our residents were sexually abused before the age of 11 and most of them before 7. And so children don't have the ability to narrate memory because it's not formed yet. So there's traumatic memory, implicit memory, body memory. That's why children who are sexually abused, if they're in Child Protective Services, they'll act out sex with dolls. They could describe, they'll talk about smells, but they can't tell you in words what it is. So narrative memory can be triggered, spontaneous, or recalled voluntarily. So accuracy, disassociated traumatic memory, the original memory is accurate. What happens once it's put into words, it's subjective. It can become subjective. Plus, if you have a bunch of women sit in a room and they talk about what happened to them, they start blending their stories. So at our house, you don't talk about your stories with anybody else. You talk about it with the counselor. You talk about it with the staff. But when you're in group, you just talk about anger management or mindfulness or whatever that you're working on, but you don't share your story. Because it gets complicated and it can be triggering. As it's repeated to others or in one's mind, it can be modified or reinforced in its modified form. So traumatic event is imprinted like snapshots, which is amazing. Just like the car accident, you can probably remember it like a series of snapshots. That's what happened. So what our brains do, they're amazing, is we use sometimes imagination to fill in the snaps. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. So when you work with women at LATISHA'S house, if you come to volunteer or if you ever decide to join us and join our team, you don't feed our clients, our residents, preconceived ideas or hunches concerning what you think happened. We don't ask leading or presumptive questions, and we avoid bringing accusations against supposed perpetrators. So we don't do that. We don't focus on perpetrators. That's what the courts do. We focus on healing. So things that happen, genuine. Sometimes women remember and they actually feel physical pain. It's not uncommon when they're recounting something and they've been dealing with it in counseling or EMDR, they'll experience the pain like it's happening again. Memory can occur in response to a trigger. The body remembers things that happen to you when you've been physically assaulted. Your body will remember that. So these are all things that happen. The purpose of memory work is to gain connectiveness to present identity through one's past. So a person without a past is a person without a future. And it sounds kind of hokey, but Hawkins and Hawkins are great. So one of the consequences of disassociation is a loss of connection to crucial events which form identity. So the issue of identity is complex, and memory work is not the primary focus of healthy therapy. In fact, capacity must be built through synchronization, loving relationship, before it's safe to engage in processing memories, which is why we talked about a therapeutic environment. We have a loving home. We say, welcome home, you're safe. Once you're in a safe place, then you can start to look at the past things that happened when you were 4 or 7 or 11 or 15 and when you were trafficked, and then you can start to deal with them. So you anchor to senses, process affect, negotiate between the adult self and the child self. So inner work, child work, we do a lot of Gestalt work as well, where we'll have women who were angry at the 4-year-old that allowed themselves to be raped. And so she'll sit there as an adult. This is further along in therapy. And she'll sit there as an adult and she'll say to the little girl, she'll hit a pillow. I mean, we hit a lot of pillows at our house. She'll hit on the pillow and she'll say, it wasn't your fault. And then she's the 4-year-old. And I say, what would the 4-year-old like to say to the 30-year-old? And she'll say, I didn't know I would be okay, but I'm glad I'm okay. Sometimes even in that, it's an existential encounter. Sometimes a woman will say to the 4-year-old, or the 4-year-old will say to the 30-year-old, I forgive you, because you didn't know. So it's very healing. It's very healing. So cognitive distortions, we see this a lot. Victims are blamed. Sexual predators tell children it's their fault. Every child that's been in a family that's dysfunctional or had a divorce or mom is abused or something, the child blames themselves. It's what children do. So girls come to our house, women come to our house, and they still feel like they're to blame, and they're not. There's secrecy, there's seductiveness. If you sexualize a child, that's all they know. And that becomes their identity, but it's not their fault. And sometimes physical pleasure is self-blame, which makes it even harder to talk about. Emotional pleasure is self-blame. Exoneration of the perpetrator, because the perpetrator will say, I love you, I do this because I love you. So we have to deal with all that. So these are things that victims do to survive: minimizing, rationalizing, denial, forgetting, splitting, sex, avoiding intimacy, addiction, suicide, cutting, releasing endorphins, etc. And so now this is my favorite definition of healing from trauma. And I love this, and it's old, but I love it. So I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It takes a long time to get out. This is why you're working on counseling. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. So that's really a summation of what happens with trauma-informed counseling at Letitia's house. The women who graduate and go to our Hope Villages, which I hope happens soon, will walk down another street. So merging of split parts, they used to think that it was impossible for people with split parts. One of our residents had 155 different splits or alters, and people said it was not possible for her to heal. She graduated from a 4-year college with a degree in elementary education. She's volunteering at a hospital, and she has a business plan. And when you come to our house, she reigns as the queen of the house. She sits at the head table. She tells jokes. She's funny. She's laughing. She's warm. She's wonderful. And you would never look at her and say, gee, you have 155 parts, because she has healed. So it is, people used to say it's impossible. Those people were sometimes committed. But guess what? There's a transformation. The alter personalities is their separateness, and they're absorbed into an integrated sense of self. And what she does is she knows when she's reacting to something, she says, this is my 14-year-old self, but my 30-year-old self is going to talk to the 14-year-old and tell her to get in line, you know, or she'll have a 4-year-old self, but she'll go talk to us and say, hey, I'm struggling, and work through it, which is really neat. So the actual merging of split parts, it's actually communication, can be likened to metaphor of a marriage. You have to do quite a bit of work so you can work together for the benefit of the whole. So recapping the heart model, a safe environment, recreate memory, process affect, negotiate between adult and inner child, forgiveness of self, awareness of God, forgiveness from God, merging of split parts, return with new insight in life. And then our mission statement, which goes back to T-1, T+1. To provide a long-term safe house for adult female victims of sex trafficking, offer individualized support to empower them to build a bridge from their traumatic past to their positive future. So anyway, do you all feel like you had to continue education in an hour? There you go. Thank you for being so patient. I'm going to go Ashley. So, and if you, I know you videotaped it, there's some references, and if you would like some more information, we have a lot of stuff that we could give you. This is Ashley O'Leary. Ashley is my senior house manager.